Hello, everyone, and welcome back for another episode of the Outdoor Adventure Series podcast. This is your host, Howard Fox. The Outdoor Adventure Series celebrates individuals and families, businesses, and organizations that seek out and promote the exploration of the great outdoors. Our guest today is Chris Paparo. Chris is an outdoor enthusiast, freelance writer, and wildlife photographer. Chris was born and raised on Long Island, New York. He's been exploring the wilds of the island for over 30 years. He is the owner of Fish Guy Photos. In addition to his wildlife photography, he writes about the nature, wildlife. He lectures, all with this purpose of bringing public awareness to the diverse wildlife that Chris calls the island home. Chris, it is a pleasure to have you on the Outdoor Adventure Series podcast. Thank you.
Hey, thanks, Howard. I'm excited to be here. It was great to follow up after our meeting at OWAA.
Fantastic. Well, as Chris just alluded to, and what I would typically share in the spirit of full disclosure, I had the pleasure of meeting Chris at the Outdoor Writers Association of America's annual conference in Jay Peak, Vermont this past October. And there he was, Chris, he has his nice camera, and he's walking around, nice guy. And I'm thinking, this is a guy I want to meet. And I think we hung out, did a little shooting together. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah. We went with the Bird Diva that morning. That was a lot of fun also.
Fantastic. And for anyone who is interested in writing in general, maybe you have a book in you want to write articles, do some freelance work, definitely want to check out the Outdoor Writers Association of America. We'll provide their backlink in the show notes. But let's get to you, Chris. You're at Long Island, New York. I have one friend that I know because I worked with him for many years. He grew up in Massapequa, New York, and I'm sure I've met a lot of folks from Long Island, but you're really, in my vantage point, really only the second one that I've really gotten to know, just through work and our common interest. But if you could share a little bit more about your background and how you came to be known for Fish Guy Photos and your photography work and writing.
Yeah. So I'm born, raised, grew up here, went to school here. I'm an islander. Generally you think of that in the Caribbean, but I'm an islander. I've been here my whole life. And, it started when I was fishing. I was a kid at 6 years old. My dad took me fishing for the first time and I was hooked ever since, and then I would kind of like, as I was getting into more and more into fishing, I wanted to learn more and more about fish so that I could catch more and bigger fish. And then as I got older, I started realizing, wow, these fish are just amazing, and the interesting features and characteristics. And I wanted to learn more and more. So that's when I said, all right, I want to go to school for marine biology. And here on Long Island, there was where I went was Southampton College, which was part of Long Island University. And at the time, it was one of the top 10 schools in the United States for marine science. So I was fortunate enough to have that in my backyard and went to school. Like I said, I went right after high school, started with a BS program there. And my thing is I wanted to work. I wanted to be a marine biologist. So like right away, I got an internship at a fish farm. And then the next semester, I got an internship at a bioassay lab. I took off a semester to work at a lab in Florida. I went to the South Pacific on a research trip. So I got as much as I could out of those 4 years. And at the same time, I was working for the New York State Marine Mammal and Sea Turtle Rescue Program. So I was going to school full time, working full time. And the day I graduated, and I'm summing this part of the story up, that the rescue center was trying to build an aquarium. And the day I graduated from college, I quit the rescue center to work for the new aquarium that was being built. And at the time I was involved with all the construction. So, here I was fresh out of school with a degree in marine science, and I was pushing wheelbarrows of cement to sculpt exhibits, so that it was not just mixing cement. I was making the exhibits, the shark tank, the seahorse tank. I was plumbing the exhibits. I was then there for 13 years, doing all sorts of stuff. Again, I was involved with the sharks, all the way down to seahorses. And then I needed a change. Something just got me. I needed something different. So I left the aquarium to try to grow my fish guide business, which I've been kind of doing on the side. And it was a slow go, but when I put all my effort to it, it boomed. I got a lot more writing gigs. I did a lot more writing columns. I wrote columns for several magazines. I got some free trips to go fish in Alaska. But, as you know, sometimes as a freelance writer, photographer, lecturer, that doesn't always pay the bills consistently. And fortunately, there was at the university that I went to, they ended up shutting down that campus. And then Stony Brook University, which is a big university here on Long Island, purchased that campus with the hopes of rebuilding that marine science program. And they were just building a $10 million research lab, and they were looking for someone to manage it. And I was super excited because that college, I had so many memories there. I met my wife there, who next year is our 20th anniversary,
Wow.
which is crazy to even think. And I got the job, which I was really excited and kind of a little bit shocked because I only have a BS in marine science. I don't want to say only, but there was a lot of PhDs and master's degrees that were fighting for that job. But my years of experience is what won me out over those higher degrees. So I've now been at Stony Brook for 8.5 years. I work with researchers that study everything from harmful algal blooms to giant whales. So my day is never the same. It's never boring, that's for sure.
Wow.
And I continue the fish guide thing. It's grown quite a bit. I don't write as much. I do a lot more lecturing these days. It just becomes it's a lot more lucrative to lecture than writing as far as time invested. But it's been a great run so far.
We don't often hear in the career field, because as a coach, I do career development, career transition, work with young kids in college, perhaps even high school. How do you market? How do you brand yourself? And as I hear your story, Chris, I'm thinking, man, this guy did pursue his love of being out on the water, being in nature. And, so many of us pursue what I call job, and we're unhappy, but I mean, you're living the life, really kind of doing what you love. And that's refreshing.
Yeah. I mean, and being a marine biologist, I'll never forget this. When I graduated college and I got my first actually I had the full-time job in marine science before I graduated, but I remember running into a second grade teacher of mine, and she was like, I can't believe it. You said you were going to go to school for marine biology. And at the time, the rescue center was called Okinos. And she goes, and you're going to work at Okinos. And I did that. I got my degree at Southampton and I worked at Okinos. And, for me, it was again, I like I said earlier, I worked. I wanted to work. I was never good in school. I got through it. Grades were not always my strong point, but I wanted to work. So that's why I did all the internships and volunteering. And that ultimately is what got me where I am. And if I had listened to any of my guidance counselors in high school, I'd probably be an accountant or something else, because every one of them told me that marine science was a big mistake. You're not going to have a job. You're not going to make any money. Mom and dad were the only people that supported my decision to be a marine biologist. And to this day still support me, and I'm successful at what I set out to do.
We probably could go on a huge tangent on careers and pursuing your dreams. And I sometimes wonder about the advice we're given, but I love mom and dad. They, and as they should believe in their children. Pursue what you love and the rest will take care of itself. And that sounds like what's been happening. So let's talk about your work some. And I have one question. I've got to ask you this. Do you like being on the water? How are you on boats?
I love being on the water, but the one thing that everybody always laughs when I say this, though, is as a marine biologist, I get seasick. And if I can have one wish, the wish would be to not be seasick, because I don't want to say I've given up on opportunity or missed out on opportunities, but I'm sometimes a little hesitant to jump into certain opportunities. It doesn't always stop me. I'm involved with a shark research team. We've tagged a bunch of sharks here on Long Island, and I'm out there as much as I can. But man, I wish I could be solid when I'm on the boat, and not always half like, all right, I'm a little shaky here today. Yeah. But I can't be on the water enough. That's why, even in the wintertime, here in Long Island, it's cold now. We're supposed to get snow next week or this week, actually. And I pulled my boat, but I haven't quite winterized it yet. I still am hoping I can squeeze in a few more days before I put her to sleep for the winter.
Oh, good for you. And by the way, I hope had a chance to listen to the episode I did with the bird diva, Bridget Butler, because she very specifically shared with our listeners that she went to college for a degree in marine biology, and she shared for everyone to listen to. I get seasick, and so I am for our listeners as I'm chatting with Chris right now. There is a huge whales. Is it the fluke? Is that what they call it?
It's its tail fluke.
The
Yeah,
tail,
that's a
tail
humpback.
fluke.
Yep.
And there's water. There's a nice home which I will never afford.
Nope, me neither.
Behind that, there's a beach and then the home. But I figured for somebody who's in marine biology and has a love of being on the water, I was just curious. Did you like being on the water? And if I'm on a boat, a motorboat, I will get queasy. If I'm on a sailboat, I'm all in, which is kind of weird for me. I don't know why. So really, you've been involved with doing the research, you've been involved building the aquarium, and now with the Stony Brook University, how did writing begin to kind of take shape for you? I mean, it sounds like you've been writing pretty much all your life, but when did that become something like, I can do something with this?
So it's funny that you said writing has been my whole life, because another thing in high school and into college, I was in remedial English, remedial reading, remedial writing. Again, I was not good at school. If you went back into high school, even college, and said, hey, you're going to be a writer someday. And not only am I going to be a writer, I'm an award-winning writer, and I'm the president of the New York State Outdoor Writers Association. So I'm still to this day blown away by that. But how did that happen? Well, I started out as a photographer, or at least had big dreams of being like a Nat Geo photographer, going around the world. And the problem is it's hard to sell photography, especially these days. Everybody's got fancy cameras, or even let's put an iPhone. So it's really hard to sell photos. And I tried. I went to shows, I went to art galleries, I spent a lot of money, but it was tough to like make a living at it. And one of the guys I worked with, he's in the fishing community. His name's Angelo Lusso. He's also a member of OWAA. He had said to me, he goes, hey, you've got a unique take as an angler, because again, fishing is my life. And he goes, you have the biology, you scuba dive, you should write something to tie that together. And it was like, all right, you know what? So I did. I reached out to one of the magazines that I grew up with reading it with my dad, The Fisherman. And I pitched him an article idea. At the time, it was about tropical fish that come to Long Island, and they bought it. And between Angelo and my good friend Todd Gardner helping me edit it, I feel like I was in high school again, read all over the paper.
I hate those red marks. I remember those red marks to this day.
Those red marks, you get them and you're like, oh. And then you'd make all those edits, and then they'd come back with even more red marks. And I'm like, I was stressing. And then finally, my friend Todd's like, look, this is as good as it's going to get for you, because he's also not trying to edit me for style, because I have my own. And I sent it in, it got published. I was thrilled. I got paid. I had my pictures in the magazine. And that kind of just started a slow snowball. And between Todd, Angelo, and Bob Banfield, there's a few other people that have mentored me as a writer and kind of pushed me. My wife also is my editor these days, but they really kind of pushed me, and it snowballed. And again, my background with marine science and into fishing, I don't generally write how-to articles like how to catch a fish. It's why do you drift for fluke, which is a common fish around here, why do you fish around rock piles for blackfish? And I kind of would make you think like a fish to catch more fish. And it was a way for me to sell my photography. That actually what sells articles is the photo. So now when I reach out to an editor, I can send them a high quality image and say, look, this is what I want to write about here. And it helps me a hell of a lot more getting into those magazines than it had without a photo.
I love that. I love that. And when you are pitching the ideas to the magazines, to the editors, how are they approaching this idea of this is kind of an educational interest as opposed to the how-to? Because I like that. I mean, I I'm not really a hunt. Well, I'm not a hunter. I've never hunted a thing in my life. I couldn't. I think I went out to a little artificial fishing pond when I was a kid, but so I've never caught anything. Okay, except the cold. How do but I love the human interest. I mean, like the whale's tail behind you, or there's tagging the shark, or watching a shark drift from one end of the ocean to the other, or swim, and why they do what they do. That to me is very interesting. And so, what's been the response from the readers, or from the editors, to that approach to this kind of work with the writing and the photography?
It's been positive. After my first couple pitches of those type of article ideas, On the Water magazine asked me to write a monthly column, a naturalist column. And they gave me free reign. They said, look, you can write about whatever you want, just tie it to fishing. I said, all right. So my first article was about sea ducks. And you might be like, well, why do you know sea ducks? And my idea was, it was a January article, and there's no fishing going on in January, but the sea ducks are here in January. They feed on crabs and mussels and hard-shelled invertebrates, which live around rock piles. Well, blackfish, sea bass, porgies eat that same stuff. So my idea was called it old school scouting. Go down to the beach in the wintertime to get out of the house and enjoy, nature. And all of a sudden you see a flock of ducks feeding in a certain area. Well, there's probably a rock pile there. So mark that mentally in your head and come back there next summer and fish for blackfish and sea bass and porgy. And they loved it. I wrote that for over 6 years. And then I picked up another column for another magazine. It was the same thing. And like I said, it was well received by the readers, the editors. And the one thing too is, back in the day when I was, at least even when I was a kid, the only way you judge a good day of fishing was how many fish you came home with and how big they were. And unfortunately, that mentality kind of screwed up a lot of our fisheries, where many of our fisheries are overfished because of that mentality. So now my idea is, look, the idea of a good day on the water is being outside, So like the whale behind me, if you're fishing, you're not catching much, and all of a sudden you see a humpback whale, that's pretty exciting. You got to take that as part of the day. Like, I didn't catch any flounder. We only saw this whale. That's the attitude that it is changing with people. They're appreciating the things around them. And I find that even with my social media, I post daily. I try to promote something that's local. I try to keep it at least seasonal. And people are always blown away. They're like, oh my God, I've been fishing here for 60 years. I never knew we had X, Y, and Z. So now next time they go out, they're enjoying it more. When they catch that so-called trash fish, they know something neat about it or cool about it. They could share that with their friends. So all of a sudden, it's not just a trash fish. It's a memory on the water of fishing and experience. And so, yeah, so it's definitely been well received.
I love that. I love that. Speaking of the magazines, you're also writing for the Naturalist Logbook, a column for them.
That was On the Water. And unfortunately, I did
Okay.
that for 6 years. And unfortunately, that got stopped. Magazine changed their format. They cut out. And as you know, as in the writing community, it's getting harder and harder with some of these magazines. They're downsizing, shrinking things. I now write features for them more so than I do columns, which honestly, a column once a month, trying to keep it seasonal and not repeating, it gets really stressful. And that's why I've shifted to doing more just feature articles. And I lecture. I lecture 2 or 3 times a week. In fact, I have a lecture tonight. I have a lecture tomorrow. So yeah.
Well, I do want to touch on the lectures, but before we do that, well, actually, let's do that first, but then I want to talk a little bit about Long Island, because it's a long island. I mean, it's huge. And I'd love to hear from you about some of the diversity that you're seeing, but let's talk about some of your lectures first. What this is a part of your work with the Stony Brook, or is this under Fish Guy Photos?
This is under Fish Guy Photos. And part of the reason for, Fish Guy Photos was, as a marine biologist, let's say, I'm not rolling in the dough. All right. That is one thing about marine science. I'm not going to be living in what we call that McMansion that's behind me, but I still want to have fun. I still want camera equipment. I still want toys. So I was like, all right, I got to come up with a way to make some extra money. And the writing was good, but it's the amount of time I put in, the reward is, it's not as good. The lecturing, I can make a lecture, I put it on my laptop, and I could show up at a different place every day of the week, or and give that same lecture to a new audience. And move on and interact with people, and the actual pay is actually better. So I started out just reaching out to a few people I was friends with that work at libraries. And then I get into one or two and they loved it. Their patrons loved it. And then they share that amongst other librarians. And then all of a sudden, before I know it, I'm doing, on average, like 30 to 40 a year before the pandemic. Then once the pandemic hit, I was doing, well, from March to March of the pandemic, I did well over 60 paid lectures through Zoom. I had to get a nice comfortable seat because I was at my computer a lot, but those all paid. And that's how I bought my first boat. That's how I bought my drone. That's, so it helps me offset the cost of living on Long Island, which is not cheap, and being a marine biologist. And my wife is also a marine biologist. So we've got two low incomes coming into the household. So again, it was just a way for me to do that. And I honestly, I enjoy interacting with people and asking questions. And I started doing a lecture series at a brewery where I bring in researchers that I work with to teach them how to lecture. Because one of the problems with researchers is they can go to a conference and talk to their peers about all sorts of scientific stuff, but the public doesn't understand those terms, that jargon. And I think a lot of the problems we face today with like climate change and other things is because you've had a stuffed up scientist, so my scientist friends won't be happy with me saying this, but you'll have a stuffed up scientist who's showing you charts and graphs and statistics, and that doesn't mean anything to the average person. Put up pictures, video, and tell a story of what's happening. So I bring in these colleagues of mine, grad students to actual full faculty. And I tell them, like, come give a talk. It's at a brewery. There'll be a food truck, but I lose the science. And they're like, they look at me all like, what do you mean lose the science? I'm like, no charts, no graphs, no statistics. Again, just put up pictures and videos and tell a story about what you're passionate about. Get people as excited about your topic as you are, and they'll want to do something. And it's worked out great. We've been doing it for over 5 years now. And I'm just in the process of booking the next series, which would be winter, spring. And it's been great. Some of those students now are learning how to do this and going to their own libraries and giving lectures and making some side cash. So the lecture thing for me has been quite good. And Zoom now allows me to speak anywhere. I mean, look at this. We're speaking across the country.
Yeah.
So I could really speak anywhere these days. So it's been great.
I mean, really, Chris, you'd be wonderful as a podcaster. I mean, just the outdoor stories of bringing your same colleagues on to have a conversation. I mean, to me, yes, it's in the morning. I haven't had my second cup of coffee, but it's like having an adult beverage with a friend, you haven't seen in a while.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And believe me, I've thought about it, but you know what? It's just one of those, it's one more thing, my list of, so I'm like, I'm going to step back and be on podcasts. It's for right now. That's the way I enjoy it.
And that's actually a great way to get your foot wet, is to be on other people's podcasts, because there's thousands of them out there, thousands. So you're doing these lectures. It's got to be pretty cool when you meet a former student of yours and comes up to you and goes, Professor Paparo, or I used to teach at a college and I was called Professor Fox. And it's like, that felt so odd because I don't have that kind of an advanced degree, but it's gotta be cool when a student comes up to you and says, you're not going to believe this, but I sat in your lecture and this is what I'm doing now.
So I'm actually not a professor at Stony Brook. So I'm a manager of the research lab, and I work with I work with all the students, but I teach them in an informal way. I'm not in the classroom with them. But yes, I do have students that have come back and have thanked me for stuff like that. But this summer, I had a story that was it got me. I was pretty excited about it. It was, at work, one of my other roles at the job is I'm a naturalist on a research vessel. So I take people out. This time of year, we watch seals and winter birds. And before I get on the boat, when I first get on the boat, before we get going, I always ask, has anybody been out with me before? And, mainly because if they've been out with me before, I don't need to use the stupid jokes that I give, we could pass on the corny jokes. And this one girl raises her hand that she's a senior at Stony Brook. I'm like, oh, when were you on the boat with me? And I didn't recognize her. I meet a lot of people. And she goes, I was actually on the boat back in high school. I was a junior. And I'm like, huh, with who? And she tells me, Captain Quaz from Massapequa High School. And I'm like, no kidding. I'm like, that had to be, and she goes like 6 years ago. And I'm like, no. And she goes, I am at Stony Brook because of you on that trip in high school, because you made a comment about at the end of the trip, I always say, hey, guess what? I'm getting paid today. This is my job to take you out here and show you this, that, and the other thing. And she thought that was the coolest thing and looked right into Stony Brook and enrolled. And at the time, now she was a senior. So it was kind of, for me, it was kind of a good feeling to be like, wow, all right. So I influenced somebody. And that's where I try to give back. Like, I didn't have any mentors other than my parents that supported me. So I'm constantly sitting down with students and giving them my world or my life, my life's work and how I got to where I was. And again, because I'm not your typical like PhD in marine science, but I'm still successful at what I've done. So a lot of students will come to me. And I honestly, I got to say, I probably got between that and my aquarium, that was this part of my job I enjoyed the most, was mentoring up and coming students or future marine biologists. Even to this day, I still get a really good feeling when I help out somebody get to that next level.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. I'm curious again, as we're chatting, I'm looking at the whale's tail behind you, the water, the island, the McMansion. In your lifetime on this island, from an environmental or conservation perspective, what are the changes that you're seeing either on the land or the water? What kind of changes are you seeing as a result of really spending your life out there?
Yeah, it's varied. I mean, there's a lot of good changes and there's a lot of bad changes. And and so the role of me as fish guy, I always focus on the good changes. There's a lot of negative stuff that's out there that is happening. There are harmful algal blooms. There is ocean acidification. There is overfishing. And people get that drilled into their head every day. And I think what happens is people lose interest in caring, or even like, for example, like, all right, one of the problems we have here on Long Island is excess nutrients in the waters. And a lot of that comes from, well, most of it comes from septic systems. Suffolk County, which is the eastern half of Long Island, there's over 1.5 million people on that part of the island. And, most of the island is septic tanks. So you got a lot of excess nutrients going into groundwater, causing harmful algal blooms and such. So that stuff is happening, and some of the other sources of nitrogen would be fertilizer. But what happens is we try to tell people, like, why do you need a green lawn? Like, really, what's the purpose? It costs you money to fertilize it, which you could spend on fishing rods or hiking boots or things like that. It takes time to maintain it, manicure it, cut it. Again, you could be outdoors, fishing, hunting, whatever you like to do. But people are like, well, I just want a green grass and everything's dead anyway, so who cares? So if I can show them, like, look at the whales look how close to the beach they are. They're right there. We have seals, we have eagles, we have peregrine falcons. All of a sudden people are like, oh, wait, there is a lot of cool stuff here and a lot of good stuff here. Maybe I won't fertilize, or maybe I'll look into a more sustainable type of fertilizer. So that's where I take my role as fish guy, is just to try to bring awareness to all the cool stuff here and say, look, there is a reason for us to recycle, reduce nitrogen, just think about the environment a little bit. Often I think people together, like, I can't do anything. How am I going to help climate change? It's a global thing, but every little thing makes a difference. And again, that's where I just try to get people excited. Like, look, there is cool stuff right here. Let's just think about little simple things. Do you really need a bag when you better get an egg sandwich in the morning at the deli? No, I can hold it. I don't need you to put it in a bag so I can just throw that bag out 5 minutes. Little things like that would make a huge difference. And again, that's why I do what I do.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about your photography, Chris. Now, chat with us about the range of photography that you're doing. And we can even include a little bit of the drone, because that's a whole other element. That's one of the toys. That's why I lecture, Howard. You have quite a range of interest when it comes to photography. And for our listeners, we're definitely going to share some photos from Chris's portfolio on our show notes, so you get an idea of the work that he has been doing. But Chris, talk to us a little bit about this range of interest you have with your photography.
Yeah, I mean, it started, just with point and shoot cameras, and I would, And, that's the thing too, often with photography. Yeah. One of the things you can say to a photographer that kind of at least upsets me as a photographer is your camera takes amazing pictures. What kind is it? Which one is it? And it's not the camera, because I could give anybody my camera, and if they don't know how to use it, they're not going to get the good pictures, but it's knowing how to use what you have. So when I first started, it was just point and shoots, and just point and shoot camera. And as I got a little bit more into it, I then would get my first DSLR, and then as I outgrew that, I got the next one. And as I learned how to use them. So I started with terrestrial cameras. I've been scuba certified since 93, but back then cameras underwater, and as a high school kid, I couldn't afford an underwater housing. So something I always wanted, but just never got there. And then, just again, slowly, and when I finally had a little bit extra cash, I bought my first underwater camera, and I spent $2,000 on it, but it paid for itself with articles and things like that. And then eventually I upgraded. So it's just been slowly and surely, and even like the drone, again, that investment came from those trips I mentioned earlier, going to fish for halibut in Alaska. I went up there once, and I wrote some articles about it. It worked out great. The owner invited me to come back a second time. And I was like, I got an opportunity. There was so much cool stuff. I'm like, I'm buying a drone because there's going to be some neat stuff. And I bought a drone, and I got a ton of footage of us catching fish and wildlife and just the scenery. And I gave that to the owner, and he brought me back for a third year. And it just, so again, a lot of my camera equipment has been like investment type stuff where
Sure.
I just keep chipping away at it. When we were there, everybody had fancy cameras, and I was drooling over a lot of different cameras.
I raised my hand for that too. Yeah.
So it's like, sometimes I'm like, all right, I'm not there yet, but again, you've got to use what's available to you. If an iPhone is all you have, learn how to use it to the best of its ability.
True.
That's what'll make you a good photographer. And then the rest of it is, when it comes to wildlife, is learning about the wildlife. It's where you're going to find them, where they might be, time of day, things like that, and then playing with the light, because photography is just about capturing light. So there's a lot of there's a lot of those little things. For me, it was self-taught. It was just kind of learn as I go, a lot of reading online and books and experimenting, asking people for advice, that kind of stuff.
And that's coming out here to Vegas. That is exactly what happened when I got out to the desert and wanted to take pictures of the stars in the Milky Way. It's just, doing lots of research. What do I need? And, finding a group that was interested in it. And for our listeners, we'll put this photo up, myself and Chris, and one of our other guests will have her episode up next week. Ruth, three of us foregoed the last night festivities by the fire pit and went out taking pictures of the Milky Way because it was right there, and we all ended up with some great shots. So
yeah, and that's to my point. I dabbled with star photography, but I didn't know anything. So when you offered, you're like, hey, I'm going to do this. I'm like, oh yeah, of course, I'm going to join along and learn a little bit and figure it out. And I was grateful because I feel like I was really excited about the pictures I've gotten. And honestly, I wouldn't have gotten them if it was just me on my own. I mean, eventually, but I might have missed that night. It might have been maybe several nights later trying to tinker and back and forth. So having
Sure.
some extra guidance makes a big difference.
Yeah, we definitely lucked out. Definitely. So let's talk about family, Chris. Now, you've mentioned your lovely wife. She's a biologist, and I am sure you have a lot of fun adventures with each other. But you also, and we could spend a lot of time, but she probably says to you, don't even talk about me. This is your show, Chris. You're on your own. But you have a family member that occasionally shows up in some of your photos. And she's got I think, a pretty good fan base. And I'm really intrigued by her. So talk to us a little bit about Emmy.
Yeah. So as my family consists, it's me and my wife. We have 2 standard poodles, which she runs through agility trials. They got master titles and everything. I got chickens, they got chickens, but yeah, the Emmy, who you're referring to, is my red-tailed hawk. One of my, remember we said about the podcast, it's just one more thing. Well, this is another thing that I do is I'm a falconer. I'm a general class falconer. I've been practicing for 13 years now.
Wow.
And I've had Emmy those 13 years as well. And we actually, in fact, were out hunting rabbits yesterday with her. So that's another one of those things that I kind of stumbled upon. It was, just dumb luck that I became a falconer. It's because, I mean, honestly, I've been 13 years a falconer. Started thinking about it 15 years ago. So it took 2 years. And if you had said to me 16 years ago about falconry, I would have said, yeah, it's in movies and TV. And, I think there's somebody in Mongolia that maybe still practices a little bit, but I didn't think it was a thing. And it's a thing. There's not many of us, especially in New York. I think we're about 200 to 250 falconers in the state. So it's a small group, but it's one of the most exciting things I do. And it has nothing to do with fish.
I love it. Now, how did you approach this hobby? I have to admit, it would be really cool to have that big, and I'm thinking very large and thick leather glove on my hand and arm. But that's got to be so cool when you've got the food in your hand and this massive, raptor comes flying right at you. I would probably duck, but you've got your hand and arm out there. What's it like?
It never gets old, I'll tell you that. Even 13 years of doing this, it never gets old. But it's funny is I didn't approach falconry. Falconry approached me, which is really crazy. Working at the aquarium and the things that I do, you meet a lot of people. And I met a guy when I was at the aquarium who was a regular. He was an aquarist. He brought in corals and fish to trade with us that were outgrowing his tank or he was raising at home. And one day he showed up wearing upland pants and he had a pouch on his hip. And I'm like, he doesn't bird hunt or rabbit hunt. I'm like, he doesn't. But I'm like, but and from the look of the pants, he was hunting because, I had some stains and stuff here and there. And I'm like, Mario, that's his name, Mario. I'm like, what's up? He goes, oh, I was just out hunting my hawk. And I'm like, huh? And, long story short, he was a falconer and he offered me to go with him one day. And I went with his Finnish goshawk, Nadia, who actually just turned 19 this year.
Oh, wow.
And it was the coolest thing I'd ever done. And he also had a peregrine falcon, a gyr falcon. His friends had Harris hawks. So I went with all of them taking pictures and they loved the fact of having a professional photographer taking pictures of their birds as opposed to just a cell phone, picture with a thumb in the picture or something like that. And after 3 or 4 months, Mario said, hey, if you want to be a falconer, I'll sponsor you because you have to be an apprentice as a whole process. And I'm like, what? You're kidding me. And he's like, no, if you want to do this, I'll sponsor you. He goes, you have the passion. You have the experience with the animals. Again, all those years of the aquarium, I worked with all sorts of exotic animals, not just fish. And long story short, 13 years later, here I am. And it's a lot of work. And, you mentioned the word hobby before, and I don't call this a hobby or even a sport. It's a lifestyle. It's intense because it's a bird. It's not a dog or a cat. It requires special care, special attention, special feeding. When I go on vacation, I can't just put food in a dish and have a litter box. I hire someone to come stay at my house. And working at the aquarium, I know people. That also helps. I know people that work with raptors and stuff. So, but it gets a little bit difficult. And like I said, it's every day. I got to do. It was pouring this morning, but I still had to go out there and work with her and make sure everything's good. And so yeah, it's exciting, but it's just one more thing that I have that I do.
One more thing. I'm curious, what has been the adventure that you will always remember the most when you and Emmy have gone out?
Oh, it changes so much depending on things that she gets or different flights. But I think one of the things that that I enjoy about it is, again, taking people with me. I often take some of my students to go check it out. I've got some friends that have gone out and, just the idea of seeing a hawk responding to me, and she's off leash. She's not tethered to me. She could fly away at any time. Sharing that, like I said, just like with my photography and writing, I think sharing my experiences with people is what I enjoy the most out of that. And I give a lot of lectures during the winter months on falconry, and it's probably one of my more popular ones. And let's face it, I bring Emmy with me. Nobody wants to hear me speak. They just want to see Emmy. So I got to keep her to the end, but yeah, I guess sharing is the greatest experience I've had. Like,
Very nice, very nice. And definitely go Team Emmy. I mean, you had that photo up on Instagram this week where she was keeping an eye out on some hawks or some
yeah,
other raptor that she had kind of took their food, so to speak.
yeah, they're very territorial, and she was in a spot that was already staked out, and they were screaming, and she just kept looking up like, all right, are they, and they were fun. But then yesterday, she actually went and attacked one up in a tree. She felt that this was her turf, so she went and chased away a red tail. So there's a lot of things that happen out there, and between different animals, you see things she catches, squirrels and rabbits primarily, but she's gotten some pheasant, she's gotten possum. She tried to get a box turtle. It was pretty funny. She landed on something and she's sitting there, and I'm like, what is she doing? I go over there and the box turtle closed up, and she didn't hurt it or anything, but she landed on its shell and was just like, what is this thing that was walking that's now a rock, And so you get to see some interesting things while you're out there as well.
I love it. I love it. And as I've shared with numerous other guests on the Outdoor Adventure series, Chris, I am an opportunistic podcaster. I am going to get out to Long Island since I've never been there. I want to, to go shooting with you, perhaps a boat, but definitely to see Emmy. So you can count on that. I can assure you, my friend.
Plan a winter trip. We'll go hawking with Emmy. I'll show you some snowy owls, seals, things like that. Yeah, it's winter. I think winter's more enjoyable here on Long Island. It's cold, but fewer people and some really exotic wildlife that we generally don't see.
I love it. I love it. Chris, before we head out, 2 questions. One is looking back at your career, and this is kind of a coaching question I would ask some of my clients, but I love this even for my guests. As you look back in your trajectory, what you've done, the decisions you've made, would you give any advice to your younger self? What advice would that be?
Just keep pushing for what you want. I think that was my biggest thing was like, I wanted to be a marine biologist. And I think, sometimes when people are telling you not to do something, you kind of get like, oh, maybe they're right, but you got to follow your gut. You got to follow what you want, your dream, and pursue it that way. Otherwise, it's not your life. You don't want to pass by on something and regret it later. Like, man, I should have, I wanted to be a marine biologist, and I put all my energy towards being a marine biologist, and I got there. And like I said, I worked at an aquarium, which was one of my dream jobs. And now I've got another dream job, so again, it's just push for what you want and you'll get it.
I love it. I love it. And lastly, oftentimes on our show, we have a segment which we call Insight to Go. Just a final thought, perhaps a quote, an article, a book, just an insight, your philosophy. And you've kind of alluded to many of them already, but any final thoughts that you'd like to share with our listeners?
One thing I say a lot, and my students, they bring this up because I say it a lot, but they get it, is slow down. There is so much cool stuff happening all around us. You just have to slow down. You don't have to be in the woods. You don't have to be on the east end of Long Island. You could be in the urban areas. You can be in New York City. There is so much cool wildlife stuff going on around you that if you just stop and slow down, you'd be amazed, and your stress level would come right down. So I can't emphasize that enough. Just slowing down in life and enjoying what's around you. That's extremely important. Like I said, I think it just overall health, and you're going to see something cool. I guarantee it.
I love it. I love it. Chris, if our listeners would like to learn more about you and your work, where are the best places for them to go?
Well, I have a website. That's www.fishguyphotos.com. I'll be honest, I'm not active there. It's a landing page to push you to my social media channels. So you can find me on Facebook, Instagram, which is what I prefer. I enjoy Instagram. It's less political, nonsense to deal with. It's just pretty photos. I'm on Twitter, Vimeo, YouTube. I'm even on TikTok now. If you like Emmy, I post a lot of pictures of Emmy or videos of Emmy on TikTok, but it's all Fish Guy Photos. on any of your social media platforms. You can find me there.
Fantastic. Well, we will provide the backlinks. We'll even get the links back to, the public facing them for Vimeo and YouTube as well. And even TikTok. I've never been on TikTok. I've seen them. I don't get it, but I realize I'm getting older. There's certain things I just don't get. And it's like, that's quite all right.
Yeah, it's another platform that people are on. And I find that you got to be on all of them, and because you never know where your audience or where you might make your next connection. And it's just another thing. And, like I said, for me, it's mostly pictures of Emmy flying to my fist, so people seem to enjoy that. And, with social media, if you can build it up, you can make a couple bucks. So might as well try them all.
There you go. There you go. Chris, it's been a pleasure. So glad we met at the OWAA conference and had a chance to have a conversation, break bread, and of course, get out there shooting with you. It's been a pleasure to get to know more about you today.
Well, thanks for having me. This has been great. And yeah, that conference was awesome. I so much good stuff and relationships came out of that conference. So yeah, thanks for having me, Howard. I really appreciate it.
Fantastic. Well, Chris, stay on the line. We're going to do a quick close, and you and I can come back and do a final chat. Okay.
Cool.
All right, folks. What a great way to start the week. And I didn't share this with Chris, but this is officially the last episode of 2021. So I think if I did my counting correctly, I was okay at math. I wasn't great. I think this is going to be about episode 116. And it's like, wow, I think we'll probably have this published somewhere between the week between Christmas and a New Year. So definitely look forward to sharing this with you all. Chris, what a great guy, outdoor enthusiast, writer, wildlife photographer, falconer. And really, just the stories and experiences of not only living on Long Island, but the experiences in the aquarium and the research and the lectures, and just really making nature so accessible and interesting that people will want to come back and want to learn more. And really great photography, whether it's on land, the wildlife, in the water, just the wonderful assortment of great photography and just for your viewing pleasure. So we'll definitely are going to have some photos on our Outdoor Adventure Series webpage. And we'll also find you'll find the links back to the website, Fish Guy Photos, as well as Chris's social sites as well. As for us, again, you can find us on the Outdoor Adventure Series website. We are officially up. We still haven't caught up the transition from Success Insight on our podcasting platforms, but for the time being, you will be able to find us by typing in Success Insight on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, Audible, and especially Spotify, where we have the Outdoor Adventure playlist. And that's just a wonderful place where you can find the episode with Chris today and all of our other episodes as well. I think we're going to be up to about 30 or 40 before the year is up. So really that was the big project this year, is to really amp up the number of outdoor adventure episodes, which we definitely hope you enjoy. And do let us know. Leave us a comment, a like. Please share these episodes. Send emails to us as well. And you can email us at Howard Fox at Fox Coaching. That's still in place, so that if you're interested in our podcast as well. And if you have some outdoor adventures, we'd love to hear from you. Folks, hey, like I said, it's the end of the year. 2021's coming to a close rapidly. What a great way to end of the year with Chris Paparo joining us to chat about life on Long Island. And we got to learn a little bit more about Emmy, and definitely give you all the links so you can check her out as well. Okay, folks, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, go out there, have a phenomenal day. Take care of yourselves, your family. Have a great rest of your holiday season, and we will see you again in 2022 for more episodes of the Outdoor Adventure Series podcast. Take care now.